Hey everybody, David McCoy here, Ochimo Properties, Real Estate Matters, and I am continuing my series on frequently asked questions for commercial real estate. And today I thought we would tackle how long does it take to get a lease done. So that's one thing that happens quite frequently is people don't know when to start, and then they get caught in a bind because they maybe waited too late, or sometimes they're starting too early and it just doesn't quite make sense. So the length it takes to do a lease, it's another one of those things that depends. In general, I tell people who I'm working with that normally it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks just to negotiate the lease. It could take longer. It could be faster if everything is exactly the way you want it and the lease is exactly the way you want it. Sure, you can turn it around very quickly in maybe a week or so. But that's pretty rare. Most of the time there's stuff that needs to be figured out, and you want to make sure your attorney has a chance to look at it. And so I would say 4 to 6 weeks is what you really need to plan on. Then, of course, if there's any build out or modifications that need to be done to the space before you move in, you have to allow for that as well. And again, that's going to take some time. It's usually, our rule of thumb is probably 60 to 90 days. But again, that would depend on a number of factors. You know, how extensive the build out is, how busy the contractors are. Sometimes you can't find contractors and that can hold you up. And if it needs permitting and things like that. So 60 to 90 days, you should plan on it. And again, with that, it could take longer or shorter with that as well. But I think that's a good rule of thumb. So already we're at about 4 months out from when you want to move in. And so first you have to find the spot. And that's normally going to take probably two or 3 months. Part of it depends upon how actively you're searching. I have people and they want to start looking, but they're not in a hurry yet. And so we go and see a few things, and then they don't really, feel like there's any urgency yet, and so they wait a while. And so I typically have people, we spend 3 or 4 months, sometimes 6 months, looking around at things. So you kind of have to think about that. But this timeline is important because I've had countless times where people come to me and they need to be in a new place and they need to be there in the matter of a couple of weeks. And it's almost impossible for that to happen. I won't say that it's completely impossible, but more than likely you are just going to have to take whatever is available, whether it suits your needs or not, just as close as you possibly can, and you have really no negotiating room. So a good rule of thumb is probably 6 months, maybe even 8 months might be a little long, but 6 months for sure. Before you want to move, you need to have started that process. Now, I am going to give you a few caveats. That is for kind of a typical lease. Big corporations, very large spaces, things like that are more complex, both in terms of what it is you're leasing and also the entities that are involved. If you are negotiating and the landlord or the tenant, either one, is a big corporation, they usually have very specific requirements for their leases and their legal departments, and that can take a long time. I had a few years back, I leased out a call center, which was an enormous building. It was a huge building, and it was to a company. I won't mention who it was, but it was a Fortune 500 company, and that lease was a complex lease. They had things that they had to do. So both the landlord and the tenant in this situation were very large corporations. They were both Fortune 500 companies. And so that lease took at least 8 months just to negotiate the lease. I think it was actually longer than that. It may have been 9 or 10 months just to get the lease negotiated. And so when you're doing things like that, you have to take that into account too. If it's a very large space, if it's a very complex process, it can take quite a while. It's one of those things. Another thing is like if it's a government entity, if the government is either leasing, the space, which normally the government would be the tenant. The government doesn't really, it's not really a landlord too much, at least not to non-government entities. They may have a situation where they, in essence, lease out space to their departments, but that's sort of an internal transaction. But the state also, if you're the landlord and you're working with the state, they have very specific things you have to do. And they're, if you do that, so I had, this wasn't mine, but a colleague of mine did a lease maybe probably 8 to 10 years ago with the federal government, and it took them every bit of a year, every bit of that, just to negotiate the lease. So you have to keep these things in mind. But a typical business who is renting some space, just a typical case, probably 6 months. Is about right. If you came to me a year in advance and there was no specific reason that we needed to get started early, I might suggest to you that we wait, a couple of months before we get started. But you need to keep that in mind. The other thing is when you start looking, you need to think about if you are currently leasing space, when that lease is up. And you probably need to have a backup plan. You probably need to know, because that's one thing too that happens is people are trying to time it so that it exactly works out, so that they don't, they are in their space on the day, they're able to move on the day the lease ends and start on the day the lease starts. And it's just nearly impossible to work that out. So typically what you want to do there is you probably need to talk to both sides there, your new landlord and your old landlord. In your old landlord, you may advise them that you're going to move, but ask them if you can stay month to month until your new spot is available. Sometimes they're happy to do that, sometimes not. On the other hand, you can talk to your new landlord and say, hey, if possible, let's try to have the space ready early for me to move in, so I have some time to kind of move there. And your new landlord might, it depends, it's something to negotiate, but they might be willing to let you have a little bit of time rent-free to make that transition. Sometimes they're willing to do that because they understand that it can be difficult to get that timing just right, and they want to try to make that process a little bit easier so that you will consider coming to their space. So the takeaway again here is how long do you want to look? In a typical case, I would say right around 6 months, maybe a little earlier than that. You want to get busy looking, and you want to try to get that all nailed down in a couple of months and get your lease negotiated and have some time to build it out if you need to do that. So that's our little tip for the day. If you have any questions about that, please let me know if there's something that you want me to cover that I haven't covered, or another topic. I'd love to hear from you. I've been very pleased that I've had several people looking at the videos. I've had a lot of comments, and I've had a lot of nice feedback, and I really appreciate that. So that's it for today. I want to thank you for looking. I'm casual today. It's a Saturday afternoon, and so I'm dressed down a little bit. But anyway, if you like this video, please click like. If you think someone would benefit from it, please share it. And if you would like to know when other videos are coming up, please subscribe. And that's our tip for the day. So I hope everybody has a terrific day today, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks. Bye.